Hello and welcome to Hobby Maker's YouTube tutorial channel. My name is Gwen Fletcher and I'm here to hopefully help you through the obstacles that you might face with your die cutting. So we're going to start right from the basics. What is a die? What is a die cutting machine? What do they do? And then how do we use them? So I'm hoping that this will help you overcome your fear. If you're one of those people who've never had your machine out of the box, we're going to help you get over that. We're going to help you problem solve and troubleshoot as we go along. So let's get started. So what is a die? Well, in the crafting world, a die is a metal shape like this. This is a simple leaf. Obviously they come in a whole host of shapes and sizes, but a simple shape like a leaf and a flower are probably some of the most common ones you're going to come across. And this is the die itself. So it's metal made from really strong, usually steel. They are powder coated to give them a non-stick surface. That helps to release the material you're cutting from the die once you've done the process. And if you can see, around the edge of here, there's a slightly raised ridge all the way around the edge, and also some little sections in the middle also have those raised edges. Now those are your cutting blades. They're not sharp at all. I can run my finger over that and it doesn't even scratch my skin. It's quite smooth. It's like a rounded ridge, if you like. But once you combine that with the power of the die cutting machine, it helps those ridges pop through the fibres in the cardstock or perhaps some other material that you're cutting and cuts this shape from card. Now that's a bit of magic. So let me show you some other styles of dies and then we'll show you some of the machines as well. So as I say, leaf shapes, flower shapes, they're probably some of the most common, and then they come in lots of other shapes as well. So I've got here a lovely little flower spray. This is just a little blossom branch, if you like. And this, you can see the ridge, that cutting ridge running all the way around this outside edge. And inside the flower on this one, there are some other little ridges which don't actually cut, but they imprint a pattern. Now that's another fantastic feature that you might come across with your dies as well. And then we have here some more leaves. Obviously these are going to come in a multitude of various sizes and designs. So if you like to make floral sprays, you can have some flower dies, make your flowers, and then have some little leaves that you can tuck into the bouquet or whatever it is you're wanting to construct. So another really popular design is butterflies. I don't know many people who don't like a butterfly. And this is from one pack of dies. So we get 5 dies in a set. I love the fact that we have different shapes and sizes. We have these ones which are little folded wings that flutter when the butterfly lands. So you've got the half shape. And then you've got 3 different sizes of the full shape as well. And these look beautiful once they cut because they're quite filigree. So the beauty of the dies is that you can get really delicate cut lines and really intricate patterns. So very, very versatile. So those are just a few of your sort of basic shapes. Obviously they come in a vast array of choices, which can be, you know, a little confusing, but we'll talk a little bit more about how to make wise decisions, hopefully, as we go along. Now this one here is slightly different. This one has a frame to it. Okay, so we've got a square frame and a patterned panel. So this is going to cut the pattern, but it won't cut it out as a square. If we can see along this edge here, there is no cutting edge. So you have a frame that then allows you to make a square shape if you cut these two together. That's probably a little confusing at the moment, but I will come back to it, so just hold that thought. So another type of die that we use such a lot in the crafting world are what we call layering dies or nesting dies, and these again come in a huge variety of shapes and sizes, but these are your real staples. You're going to want a couple of sets of these, I would think, in your stash. So here we have some squares, and as you can see, there are lots and lots of them in different sizes in this set. These particular ones have a little rounded corner, but they come with square corners. They might come with a fancy detailed corner. Again, lots of choices. And these are great value, although they're perhaps an investment initially, but they're going to give you so many options. So with a die set like this, what you can do is create not only panels of various sizes. So for instance, if we cut this one, this will give us a piece of card that size with little rounded corners. And that might create the front of the card or the project that you're starting from. But if we bring in one that's a few sizes smaller, I hope you can see straight away the potential there to cut a frame. If we cut these two sizes together through our die cutting machine, this will give us this section here, which will create a frame, and also this section, which will create another panel. And the choice then becomes endless as to how you combine those. So we have squares, rectangles, and these particular ones have a little stitched detail around the edges. You can buy simply plain shapes if that's your preference, but you can find these with fancy detail, and these have a little stitch all the way around the edge on the inside and the outside, and the cutting blade runs down the centre of the two rows of stitches. And again, I'll come back to why that's important later on. And then squares. You can't get far without squares in life, can you? And circles. You can also get ovals and hearts and all sorts of other shapes. These are really versatile for creating layers, so you can cut different sizes and stack them all together. You can create an aperture or a window, which might be in the front of your card, and then you can pop something at the back of that, or it might be for a frame, as we've talked about already. And when you then bring in the fact that you can also buy plain shapes, but with fancy detail. So this circle has got a little loopy edge all the way round, which is really pretty. And again, you have several sizes. So you can cut two of these together to create a frame. But how about if we combine one of these with one of these? Then you're going to get a really different look, and you're going to get a really massive amount of options. So those are our basic shapes. Then we come into more fancy shapes. This is still what I would call a nesting set or a layering set of dies. And this one has a combination of a plain edge and a postage style stamp edge all the way around. So again, you can cut panels with these, windows, frames, or you can use your plain edges just to cut mats and layers for your cardstock. So again, once you start to combine these, it does get more confusing until you get familiar with it, but it does give you loads and loads of options. And then we come into really decorative dies. So we have things like this, which is a big background panel, very intricate, very delicate pattern, but really beautiful. Or something like this, which is a herringbone pattern. And then of course you've got things like alphabets. So I'm sure you can see by now that the choice is huge. One thing I would say to you is start with what you like. Start with what you know you're going to use. Perhaps you're a fan of butterflies. Treat yourself to a set of butterflies and work with those. Don't overcomplicate your life to start with, because it's complicated enough. So now we've talked about the dies, let's have a look at the die cutting machines. I'm going to use this one, which is my machine of choice at home. And this is from Spellbinders. It's called a Platinum. This one is a large one, so this is A4 in format, but as you can see, it's quite compact because the sides or the wings here fold up. So if you're limited for space in your craft room, that's something to bear in mind. However, do also think about the fact that once you are die cutting, these wings come down and you're going to be running your plates through. So you do need space for it to come out the other side as well. But you might have a separate section or a desk or something where you could set that up so it can be freestanding and ready to go. So this is the machine. This is a large A4 format machine, and as we've said, it has the fold-up tables either side. Now the mechanics of the machine are under here. I wouldn't recommend putting your fingers in it, certainly not when the machine is moving. But in here you've got a pair of rollers, so one at the bottom there and one at the top. And they work a little bit like an old-fashioned mangle in that those two rollers come together, they roll across each other, and they apply pressure. And it's that pressure which allows the die to cut through the cardstock. So it's a bit of magic. It really is. Nothing in there that can hurt you unless you set it moving and put your hand in. Well, who's going to do that? Hopefully not you or I. Okay. With the machine then come a set of plates and platforms. Now this is where people get very confused and I'm going to try and demystify as much as I can of this through these series of tutorials. But I'll give you the basics to start with. So with this machine, we have our large platform. These are thick, white, very solid, very rigid, and this gives you the basis of all your other sandwiches with your plates that you're going to need to use. So this is our base plate. Other machines might call it an A plate, a platform, a base plate. All of those names will fit this large platform. And helpfully on this one, we do have some suggestions as to what each sandwich is going to be used for, how to put it together, what materials you can cut, what sort of die to use, all that sort of thing, which is where everybody gets very mixed up and goes, oh, I don't understand. Let's help. So that's your base plate. And then you also have cutting plates. Now there's a clue in the name. Cutting plates are what you use for cutting against. These are the two which make the bread of the sandwich. Two pieces of bread, the filling, i.e. the die, the cardstock or other material is going to go in between. So that's your sandwich filling. No die should ever come in contact with this. Everything should be in between these two plates. And then of course there are variations, but let me show you the basic premise. So we put our first cutting plate onto our base plate. Then we need something to cut from. So I've got a piece of cardstock here. This is a 240 gram weight smooth cardstock. And this is the die. I showed you this one earlier, the little blossom spray. The little ridges on this die need to face the cardstock. So the back of the die is very smooth. All right. You need to make sure you're putting the ridged side down facing the cardstock. So in this occurrence, we're going to be cutting down onto this cutting plate. All right. And then we have a second cutting plate that goes on top and finishes off our sandwich. Once you've got that all put together, you need to make sure everything's lined up and square in the machine. You don't want it tilted like this because it's going to hit the sides of the machine and not be able to move through. So make sure it's all nice and straight, and make sure your plates are lined up at the front of the platform. And then mine are a little bit bent, so I have to manipulate them a little bit, but just start them off under this main band of the machine. Remember our rollers are under here, that's where the magic's going to happen. And on the side of the machine you'll see there's a handle. This is what we turn to get those rollers moving. So we start off by giving it a little bit of a helping hand, push those plates into the machine, and then once you feel it grab, just keep turning the handle. Once the die goes under, you'll feel a bit of resistance. Just keep turning that handle all the way through to the other side. Sorry about the squeak. Now we can see when we take away our top plate, we have here the die has cut through the fibres of the cardstock. So we can now take away the surrounding card, and then we've got our shape in our die. So let me just show you how to remove that. Sometimes these will just pop out, but what you'll find with a lot of dies is they have little holes, and you need something with a sharp point, a piercing tool, or something called a die pick, which I'll talk about in a minute. And you can use this to just push from the back through those little holes to release the shape from the die. And then sometimes you can once just release one end, and then you can just gently ease it out from the die like so. And there we have our beautiful little die cut blossom spray. And this one, you can see it's got some lovely detail embossed into the cardstock where these flat areas in the die have pushed into it but not cut it. So that's a really lovely feature of this particular die. All right, so that's a basic die cutting process. So what sort of tools do we need to be able to do this? Well, we've already mentioned a pokey tool, a sharp point, something like that is useful. You might have a brad awl that you can use, that's perfectly fine. This is another tool that's really quite useful to have in a die cutting world. This is a die brush, I'll talk more about that. But in this end, we've got our die pick, so that's the sharp point as well for plucking bits out from the dies. So something like that is going to be really helpful when you start to die cut. Scissors for cutting cardstock, for snipping away bits. If your die's been problematic, sometimes it's easier to snip away some of the surround so you can see more clearly what you're doing. It's always useful to have a pair of scissors. I use this for scraping bits off my plate. Sometimes you get bits of cardstock left on here after you've die cut, and I just use this to scrape them into the bin. But you can use an old credit card, you could use a ruler, anything that's got a straight edge, just to scrape off those bits and pieces. It's much easier than trying to pick them off with your nails, trust me. Low tack tape is essential. If you're taping dies together, as we mentioned earlier, trying to create a frame, you need to tape them in place, because once they're in this machine and the pressure starts to roll, they will shift. So having them taped down prevents that from happening. So a very low tack tape. This one is a 3M by Scotch. I've also seen people use washi tape and masking tape. Personally, I'm not a fan of that because they're pressure sensitive tapes, which means when you put machines like this onto that tape and the pressure's rolling, the adhesion of that tape is going to increase. And so it's going to stick really tightly to your cardstock, and then you can have problems trying to remove it and it can actually tear your cardstock. So a low tack tape is always best. And then this is a sticky stuff remover. It's like a crepe rubber. This is quite good for removing sticky bits from your die and removing perhaps tape residue from your die cut, which is the paper part of it. It just removes some sticky residue. That can be quite handy to have around as well. And that's about it. That's my basic sort of toolkit. Another thing I do like to use sometimes, depending on the surface I've got my die cutting machine on, is some rubber shelf liner. You can buy this all over the place. I lay this on the desk, put the die cutting machine on top of it, and it just stops the die cut machine from slipping around. A lot of die cut machines now have non-slip feet or a suction grip bottom, but when I first started die cutting they didn't, and the machine used to be sliding around all over the place. So something like that might be helpful depending on what surface you're working on. But if you find your machines wiggling about a bit, that will solve that problem as well. Okay.